Hi, I'm Stephen Tryon, and I'm back again to talk a little bit more about my new book, What Makes a Great President. Tonight, specifically, I want to talk about one of the greatest presidents that I examined in this book, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is ranked in the top three of all presidents by all four of the surveys that I've used in my analysis in this book. And for obvious reasons, if you're familiar with any of the history, FDR, as they called him, led us out of the Great Depression, and then he led America to victory in World War II. But tonight I want to highlight just a few things from the historical context section. And in each of the presidential analyses that I present in the book, I start with historical context, kind of the big picture to set the stage for their presidency. And then I talk about the specifics of their presidency and the reasons why those specifics make them either one of our greatest presidents or one of our worst presidents. So that's kind of the format for each of the 8 men that I examined, the 4 greatest presidents and the 4 worst presidents. So in the case of FDR, the historical context is interesting. And it's interesting the context of this election that we're in the middle of right now. In 1918, at the end of World War I, the Republicans gained control of both the House and the Senate in that election, that midterm election. And then in 1920, the Republicans won the general election and they won the White House. So from 1920 until the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, Republicans had complete control of the government. And in fact, the man who won the election to become president in 1928, Herbert Hoover, had been the Secretary of Commerce for the preceding 8 years. So there really was no one to blame when the Great Depression hit for the policies, the regulation or the lack thereof that led up to it, Republicans themselves. And some will say, gee, there was this big global dimension, and that's true. But again, one of the policies of the Republican administration from 1918 all the way through onset of the Great Depression was isolationism. And one of the responses when the Great Depression hit was to put up a tariff because they were trying to be protective of the American economy. And in response to that Smoot-Hawley tariff, other nations threw up tariffs of their own. And basically that had the effect of collapsing global trade, which made things worse. And then in responding to the Great Depression, the federal administration of Herbert Hoover kind of turned to the states and said, hey, you guys fix this, and turned to private corporations and to charities and expected them to fix it. And the problem was much too big and much too complex for them to handle. And so that failed miserably. So by 1932, when the election of 1932 came along, people were ready for a change. And that's when we elected FDR. And he just came in and completely changed the approach, brought the power of the federal government to bear, fixed the banks, regulated financial transactions on Wall Street. We get from the Roosevelt administration or from the Roosevelt years what he called the New Deal. We get Social Security, we get unemployment insurance, we get insurance on our bank deposits, which were never there before, and that's why banks were failing and people were losing their homes. We get things like a minimum wage, we get the Fair Labor Standards Act, we get Securities and Exchange Commission. So many of the things that we take for granted today that are the guide rails that keep our economy on track are things that we got from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's why he's considered one of the greatest presidents. But the historical context of the Republicans controlling everything right up until the economy fell off a cliff. And it did fall off a cliff. Between September of 1929 and the end of 1932, the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 89% of its value. 89% of its value. And unemployment rose to 25%. And that was a direct response to the policies and procedures that the Republicans had implemented. And I think that's important for us to consider this year because we hear the Republicans talking about how bad the economy is under President Biden and how they're going to fix things. And frankly, the Republicans don't have a great track record of fixing the economy. They have more of a track record of messing it up. And I would tell you that as far as their claims about the Biden economy being worse than the Trump economy, that's just not true. And here's a chart that I got from the Wall Street Journal on October 12th. Okay, and what it does is it shows the cumulative change in gross domestic product over the Trump administration, compares that to the Biden administration. And what you see is that the Biden administration outperforms the Trump administration. And the other thing that you see is that the Trump administration has this big crater right here. And that's a direct response to Trump's horrible mismanagement of the defining crisis of his presidency, which is the COVID pandemic. Okay. And what did he do here? He pointed to this, he started blaming the states and blaming the city governments, and especially when those people were from the Democratic Party, from the other party. So he's playing the blame game and trying to pass the buck, not unlike what Hoover's response to the Great Depression was. That's kind of what happened here with COVID. And the response was a disaster. And basically the economy came to a standstill. And so we had shortages of products. And what happens when you have shortages of products? What happens to the prices of those products? Well, the prices go up. If there's not enough of something, supply and demand tells you that the price goes up. And what do you call it when price goes up? You call it inflation. So what kind of an economy did Biden inherit from Trump? He inherited an economy that had this very, very strong inflationary pressure that came directly from Trump's mismanagement of the COVID crisis. So on top of that, what you see under the Biden economy is a steady improvement of gross domestic product and a steady improvement in addressing inflation. So there you have it. And I hope that's helpful. But also, I hope that you consider now taking a look at this book, because although FDR's the history and context of the presidency of FDR is illuminating in terms of the economy, there are other lessons like that to be gained from looking at the other presidencies that I examine in this book. And so I think it's worthwhile, and I hope you'll take a look at it. Thank you.